Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. According to statistics, approximately 30% of violent crimes committed around the world remain unsolved, despite the rapid development of technology and techniques, as well as the creation of extensive DNA databases. As a rule, most of these crimes are solved on hot tracks, but there are cases when the investigation lasts for years or even decades before the perpetrator is punished. But the Ray Greenberg case, which we will look at in this video, is interesting in that for many years of investigation, it has hardly moved forward. The case has been investigated with numerous irregularities, and over time, there are more questions than answers. The brutal murder of a young woman to this day remains a mystery, and what is remarkable is that the investigation is trying hard to prove that the cheerful Ellen, who was enthusiastically preparing for her own wedding, suddenly decided to leave her life. But let's try to understand everything in order. Who is Ray Greenberg? Ellen was born in New York in June 1993 in the family of Samuel and George Greenberg. She was the only child of her parents, growing up in love and care. During high school, the girl was actively engaged in team sports and even gave hope as a promising athlete. She was an active, restless, and sociable child, but at the same time studied well, showing a special interest in the humanities. After graduating from high school, Ellen became a student at Pennsylvania State University, where she received a degree in public relations. But having started working on a specialty, Greenberg realized that this is not what she would like to devote her life to. Parallel to work, the girl enrolled in the correspondence department of the Pedagogical Institute. A few years later, she brilliantly defended her diploma and moved to Philadelphia, where she was hired to work in one of the local schools as a junior high school teacher. According to relatives, Ellen's life was going great. She was full of enthusiasm, made big plans for the future, and simply adored her work and small students. At the same time, Ellen met a boy with whom she had a torrid affair, and soon they began to prepare for their wedding. The girl's favorite was a young man named Samuel, or just Sam, Goldberg. He was from a fairly wealthy and well-known family in the city. His parents owned their own large business, and his uncle had a reputation as one of the best lawyers in the state. The young men met in 2009 at a party, thanks to their mutual acquaintances, and immediately liked each other. The friendly interaction quickly turned into a rapidly developing romantic relationship, and soon they decided to move in together and live together. On the eve of 2011, Sam made his beloved a proposal, which was the best gift for the new year. He gave her a beautiful diamond ring, and the couple began to prepare for the upcoming wedding, which was scheduled for the spring of the same year. Family members of both young people took the news with joy, and it seemed that the happiness of lovers can no longer interfere with anything. Ellen plunged headlong into the pleasant troubles associated with the wedding, making lists of guests and sending them invitations, choosing a venue and elements of decor for the event, trying on wedding dresses, trying to create their ideal image, and planning a honeymoon. It is noteworthy that almost all these issues the bride was engaged in independently, and the groom did not visibly participate in the process. But loved ones did not attach much importance to this, and Helen never complained. True, there were some oddities, to which everyone paid attention only after the tragedy occurred. In January 2011, the weather in the city was very snowy and frosty. On the 26th, Ellen went to work at school as usual, but close to noon there was a strong wind and a blizzard, so classes were canceled and students and teachers were sent home. Ellen returned to the apartment she and Sam shared. It was in a cozy apartment complex located in one of the quiet areas of the city. Soon Sam returned home as well. According to some reports, the couple that day quarreled, which was mentioned in passing, and Sam himself, but later he began to deny it. Close to 5 p.m., Sam decided to go to the gym located in the same apartment complex. He was gone for less than 1 hour, but when he returned, he could not get into the apartment because the door was locked from the inside. Sam first knocked loudly and insistently, then began calling his fiancée by name, which attracted the attention of neighbors, and then began calling her on the phone and sending messages. No one responded to his yelling, knocking, and calling, but it was heard that the phone was inside the apartment. Sam then went to the first floor of the building to the security guard to ask for help. Samuel explained the situation to him and asked if it was possible to open the front door, to which the guard replied that this was beyond his authority and that he could not leave his post by instruction. Then Sam went back up to his floor and decided to act on his own. He slammed his shoulder into the door, and the first time he did it, he managed to break the latch. It was quiet inside. Ellen's call was never answered, and when he entered the kitchen, he saw a gruesome sight. His fiancée was sitting on the floor, leaning back against the cabinet door, her body slashed with a knife and her clothes stained with blood. Sam immediately started calling emergency services, describing the situation, and when asked to check if the girl had a pulse, he acted strangely, asking several times if he really needed to do that. Then there was silence, and afterwards Sam suddenly stated that there was a knife sticking out in his fiancée's chest, which, allegedly, he had not noticed before. He also added that Ellen was obviously already dead. The police officers who arrived on the call were quite surprised and noted that they had never seen such a thing in their many years of practice. The door was indeed locked from the inside with a latch, which Sam had subsequently knocked off with his shoulder. There were no signs of forced entry or the presence of intruders in the room. Nothing had been stolen from the apartment. All valuables and money were still there. Nothing had been searched or touched. But the most interesting thing began when the body of the dead girl was examined. No signs of struggle or attempts to defend herself were found, as if everything happened suddenly, and the victim simply did not have time to react. On her body counted about 24 stab wounds of varying depth, and the final blow came to the heart, and it took Ellen's life. We will return to the blatant negligence with which the crime scene and the body of the deceased were examined a little later. This negligence allowed a lot of evidence to be missed and left a possible perpetrator at large. But even more strange was the behavior of the police, who even before the medical examination thought that Ellen had done this to herself. Panic attacks, visits to a psychologist, and prescription drugs. In favor of the version of voluntary departure from life was the fact that Ellen, since some time, began to suffer from anxiety disorder and panic attacks arising on its background. The situation was so serious that Ellen even sought help from a psychologist. Close, she tried not to complain, so as not to worry them, and relatives in turn associated changes in Ellen's behavior with stress and excitement before the wedding. However, the specialist who worked with Ellen prescribed her 2 medications, which she took regularly to combat her anxiety. As the psychologist himself would later report, neither of these drugs, neither together nor separately, could in any way aggravate Ellen's mental state and cause thoughts of death. The specialist also noted that despite her anxiety, the patient never had such thoughts. In addition, Ellen's friends and colleagues noticed that after she and Sam started living together, her behavior began to change. In addition to becoming anxious and restless, Ellen almost stopped making any decisions on her own. In every situation, Ellen would say that she needed to discuss it with her fiancé, that she couldn't give an answer without consulting him. Similar oddities noticed, and parents of the deceased, but every time her daughter tried to complain to them about her difficult emotional state, she added that Sam had nothing to do with it. And 3 weeks before the tragedy, Ellen told her mother that she wanted to quit school, drop everything, and return to her parents' house. Her mother was very surprised at her daughter's words, but assured her that she could return home at any time, and her parents would accept her without question. However, Ellen never brought up the subject again. Later, it was hypothesized that after the couple moved in together, Sam began to show violence towards his fiancée, and she was scared, afraid to tell anyone about it. The psychologist Ellen consulted did not confirm or deny this version, but noted that Ellen had difficulty articulating and expressing what she was experiencing and what was bothering her. It was as if she wanted to share something important, but the fear was stronger than that. Oddities and inconsistencies in the case. This unusual case from the very beginning raised a lot of questions, but most interestingly, no one even tried to find answers to them. The carelessness with which the examination of the crime scene and the body was conducted, as well as the expertise, is simply astounding. Many circumstances, facts, and evidence were simply ignored and irretrievably lost, and without them it was impossible to restore the full picture of the incident. To begin with, on the hands of the victim, was not found typical for self-defense injuries, which means that the girl was not trying to defend herself. But at the same time, on her body revealed numerous hematomas, which, judging by the degree of healing she received several weeks ago, the fiancé explained that these are most likely the consequences from playing team sports. However, Ellen's parents assured that their daughter had not visited gyms and playgrounds for a very long time because of the workload at work, as well as active preparations for the wedding. No suicide message was found. Ellen looked like a victim of a brutal massacre, but despite this, almost immediately a version of voluntary departure from life was voiced. Moreover, there were food, spices, and a cutting board on the table in the kitchen. So, according to the logic of the investigators, Ellen started to cook dinner, but suddenly changed her mind and decided to cut herself to death with a knife. Further, as I have already noted, on the body of the victim counted 24 penetrating wounds of varying depth, and forensic examination showed that 10 of them were inflicted from the back, so if the girl was attacked from behind, and some of them were serious enough, and if they did not kill Ellen immediately, then certainly deprived her of the ability to move and resist. It is simply impossible to inflict such injuries on oneself, and then to stick a knife into one's heart to the hilt, and this caused medical experts to doubt the originally announced cause of death. However, despite this conclusion, the investigation continued to insist on the previous version and refused to initiate criminal proceedings. The main argument was the absence of traces of strangers in the apartment, as well as the absence of signs of self-defense. By the way, there were also some doubts about the possibility of penetration into the apartment, because the latch on the inner part of the door was also very peculiar. It could be closed from the outside, but not completely. If the latch had been closed from the inside all the way, it would have been impossible to break it out with a single blow of the shoulder without damaging the doorway. But, judging by the nature of the damage, it was only partially closed, and it could have been done from outside the door. Although the victim's spouse or partner is usually the prime suspect in such cases, Sam has always remained above suspicion. No charges were brought against him, and it was only on the day of the incident that he was interviewed at the station in the presence of his uncle, who, as already mentioned, was a well-known and influential lawyer. Moreover, the whole picture and sequence of events of that day was reconstructed only according to the words of Sam Goldberg, who at times was confused in his own testimony, but wrote everything off as stress. Neighbors confirmed only that they heard the knocking and screaming of a guy who could not get into the apartment and called his fiancée, but that's all. Sam further claimed during his testimony that he went to the security guard for help, and the guard went upstairs with him and saw him kicking down the door. But the guard denied this information, saying that he had not left his post. Strangely enough, but the investigation did not return to this issue, considering this detail irrelevant. A recording from only one surveillance camera leading to the gym was also checked. It shows Sam walking towards the gym and then walking back. But in the interval between these two events, he could well have gone out through another passage and then returned to the gym in the same way. However, his alibi was not checked, and possible witnesses who could confirm that he had been working out or deny it were not even looked for. Sam did not call the police until an hour later, after he found the door locked and his fiancée unresponsive to knocking and shouting. In addition, the officer who took the call noted that Sam was acting strangely. Despite the fact that he was screaming and wailing, the specialist thought that it was a feigned panic, because Samuel was calm enough to answer questions, and his voice was not shaking. When he was asked to start resuscitative measures, he first doubted the need to do so, then quieted down, and then, and after all, reported about a knife sticking out of his girlfriend's chest, which earlier he allegedly did not notice. It is noteworthy that before calling the police, the guy called his parents and his lawyer uncle, who arrived at the apartment before the police. To the station to testify, as already mentioned, Sam also went together with his uncle. In addition, the next day, Sam went back to the sealed apartment with the same uncle to get some personal belongings and took out all of Ellen's gadgets. They took 2 laptops, a phone, and a tablet of the deceased. When the investigation suddenly decided to check these devices a few days later, it turned out that the search queries included topics related to voluntary demise. The police officers who arrived at the scene made only a cursory examination of the scene and concluded that Ellen had taken her own life. Subsequently, despite the emergence of new details, they refused to change their verdict. The order of the wounds could not be established, but it is certain that the final blow was a blow to the heart. The medical examiner who conducted the autopsy found all this very strange, and he decided to conduct his own additional investigation, sending a sample of the spine of the deceased to a highly specialized specialist who could give a conclusion regarding the integrity of the spinal cord. If the spinal cord was damaged, then Ellen would be paralyzed and unable to stab herself in the heart. But soon the expert miraculously changed his mind and abandoned his investigation, stating that according to his report, the spinal cord had not been damaged. However, the conclusion itself was never attached to the case materials. It also didn't bother anyone that with such numerous and extensive wounds on Ellen's body, there was very little blood around, which could indicate that someone had wiped it off, but no one even bothered to look for possible washed-away marks. The luminol used in such cases was simply ignored. The trash cans in the apartment were also not examined, and if there was any evidence in them, they were lost forever. The unhappy parents were informed of the death of their only daughter by the Goldberg family, for they were the first on the scene. Ellen's family lived in another town, a couple hundred miles away from their daughter, but they arrived as quickly as they could. Santa and George couldn't believe what was happening, and flatly denied that Ellen could have taken her own life. But the grief-stricken parents were never given a clear answer to the question of what happened that night with their daughter, only a dry conclusion and refusal to initiate criminal proceedings. Then the Greenbergs decided to conduct their own investigation with the involvement of independent specialists. Soon they were contacted by a private detective who offered his help completely free of charge because he himself wanted to understand this confusing case. The detective studied the materials and came to the conclusion that Ellen's body was moved after her death. This was evidenced by a dried blood trickle from her nose toward her ear. But Ellen was found in a sitting position, so the blood couldn't have traveled that way. He also found smeared stains on the floor, very similar to drag marks. In addition, after a second one, the guard remembered that Sam, who had asked for help, was wearing a tracksuit and said he had come back from the gym, but he was wearing boots. He did not have a bag with a change of shoes with him. But despite the new evidence and witness testimony, the parents of the deceased were again denied a criminal case or further investigation. The Greenbergs were even denied case files, including a recording of Sam's phone call to the police, as well as surveillance footage showing the time he walked toward the gym and then returned from there. 4 years later, a new young officer has joined the county's homicide unit, taking a position as an assistant prosecutor. He had heard about the unsolved, strange case while he was still studying at the university, and now he decided to get materials from the archives and get to the truth. His attention was drawn to the injury to the back of the head, which could be the first to indicate that Ellen had been attacked from behind when she hadn't expected it. Also of interest to him was the note that there was no spinal cord injury, but there was no official document to prove it. All of the ADA's attempts to find any report regarding the spinal injuries were unsuccessful. It was allegedly lost somewhere in the archives. Then he made an official request to the Center of Forensic Medical Examination to get a duplicate of the document. And then it turned out that no one had ever given such a conclusion, and the body was not examined for spinal cord injuries. At the same time, a fragment of the spine had somehow miraculously been preserved and could be re-examined. An independent specialist was brought in and determined that the spinal cord had been damaged in several places at once, so that Ellen could not have inflicted further injuries on herself. The resulting materials were passed to the police, but there, after reviewing them, again refused to initiate criminal proceedings. In 2018, the coroner gave an official conclusion, which stated that all 20 wounds the deceased had inflicted on herself, and there can be no doubt about it. New investigation. Once again, amid a stalemate of justice, the grief-stricken parents hired a new attorney with whom they recollected all the documents, previously unrecorded evidence, facts, and witness statements. In 2019, they filed a new lawsuit against the coroner and experts who had improperly done their jobs and effectively collapsed the case. The following spring, the lawsuit was heard and settled, But trials never began due to the pandemic raging around the world. It was expected that the case would be reclassified, but due to the negligence of the police and medical examiners, as well as the resulting confusion, crucial evidence was lost and irretrievably lost. The parents of the dead girl even created a page in the social network dedicated to the progress of the investigation, where they share official materials, new details, and versions. Family, friends, and colleagues of Ellen insist that she could not take her own life, and even do it in such a heinous way. Ellen, in principle, did not tolerate the sight of blood. It made her sick, and she also had a low pain threshold, because of which she has never done tattoos or piercings. In the summer of 2022, the case was dismissed again, but the Greenbergs got it transferred to the district attorney's office, where a new prosecutor took over. The investigation began again, 11 years after those terrible events. But to this day, the investigation has never been finalized. How did Sam's fate turn out? For the first year after the tragedy, Samuel tried to keep in touch with his estranged father-in-law and mother-in-law. However, he did not take any part in the investigations initiated by them. He flatly refused to communicate with the police, and it seemed that he was not interested in the case. He himself adhered to the official version that his fiancée himself inflicted fatal injuries. Goldberg soon found solace with another girl, and just a year later married her. Together with his wife, he moved to another state and stopped contact with the Greenberg family. Now he and his wife are raising 2 children together, and about the dead ex-fiancée, Sam tries not to remember. What do you guys think? Is Sam responsible for Ellen's death? July 28, 1996 was a normal summer day in South England. Captain John Copic and his son readied themselves for a day of fishing on their Brixham trawler Mulcahy. After a day of unsuccessful hauls, father and son ventured further into a place called the Roughs. After weighing down the mad and tossing it overboard, they waited. Both men felt the familiar drag of a heavy catch. Copic assumed they must have caught a big fish and decided it was time to bring the net back to the surface. However, it was not a fish. Scrummed, the men watched as the dead body of a man flopped onto their deck. Copic immediately alerted the Brixham Coast Guard. The body was badly decomposed. It had been in the ocean for some time. It had been nibbled on by fish, but was impeccably dressed in a long-sleeve shirt, corduroy pants, and brown shoes. Police noted that his pockets had been turned out. There was no identification on him. The only identifying features on the John Doe were a badly smudged tattoo on his right hand and a Rolex watch on his wrist. The body was transported to the medical examiner's office in Devon. The man was estimated to be between 40 and 50 years old. The tattoo looked like a cluster of stars. The only serious injury had been to his head. It was not fatal, and Matt, along with other bruising, seemed consistent with being dragged along the seabed before being pulled up into the boat. His lungs were filled with water. It was ruled a drowning, a common occurrence in the area given the English Channel was just off the coastline. Police believed he may have fallen overboard during one of the ferry crossings. The only other possible way forward was to identify him through dental records. If he was a British citizen, they'd be on record, and so the examiner did just that, but it would take a while. It was by chance a mortuary technician noticed the man's watch. It was a Rolex Oyster self-winding watch that was fully waterproof and required motion to remain active for 48 hours at a time. It was also possible to trace the ownership if it was an original. Examining the watch, investigators were able to determine that the man had drowned on July 20, 1996, as the calendar features showed the date July 22nd. They were also able to find a hidden serial number between the wristband and watch face. This number was sent off to Rolex to determine if it was an original and had been serviced by the owner. In the meantime, the John Doe was dubbed the Rolex Man, and the mystery deepened. Several weeks later, through records kept by Rolex, investigators received a name: Ronald Joseph Platt. The medical examiner also received the dental records to corroborate this evidence. Ronald Joseph Platt was a 51-year-old TV repairman. Records state that he was born in Calgary, Canada in 1945, before his family moved to Britain. He was unmarried and had once served as a soldier in the British Army as part of his national service. Close friends described him as a quiet and introverted man who had a passion for his native country, Canada. He was also interested in electronics and precision engineering, something which led to him buying a Rolex in Germany in 1967. It was one of his most prized possessions, and his ex-partners said Platt would not even take his watch off to shower. Using this information, investigators needed to find out exactly who Platt was and how he ended up tangled in a fishing trawler. Detective Constable Ian Clenahan of the Devon and Cornwall Police was assigned to the case from the initial discovery. Police were able to discover that Platt's last known address was in Essex, hundreds of miles from where his body was found. Clenahan made contact with the Essex Police Department. Detective Sergeant Peter Redmond offered to visit the address to help with the case. When Redmond visited the property, it was vacant. Redmond contacted the landlord to explain that the owner had moved some time ago, but provided the detective with a reference letter. The letter contained the forwarding address and contact number of one David Davis. Calling the number provided, Redmond was able to reach out to Davis. The detective inquired about Platt and Davis's relationship before explaining that the body they discovered in Devon was possibly that of his friend. Davis agreed to pay the Essex police a visit. Redmond met with Davis and found him to be an amiable person who seemed quite confident. However, he was quiet and did not ask many questions about Platt's death or discovery. When prompted, Davis explained that he and Platt had been friends for several years. Davis told Redmond that he hadn't seen Platt in over 3 months. The last time they'd met, he'd loaned him money to start an electrical business in France. As far as Davis knew, Platt had been living in France all this time. During the interview, Redmond learned that the tattoo on Platt's hand was in fact a maple leaf, the national symbol of Canada. Davis explained Platt's love for the country. Having given all the information he could, Davis left the station, promising to send Detective Redmond a photo of Platt. Days later, Redmond received the photo as promised. Police in Essex were able to wrap up the investigation on their end, landing on the theory that Platt fell overboard and drowned along the channel. This fit the story told by Davis. It was just an unfortunate accident. As the Essex case wrapped up, Clenahan needed to tie up the loose end on his side. He tried contacting Davis several times, but was unsuccessful. He turned to his colleague Redmond in Essex to help make contact with Davis. Agreeing to this, Redmond paid Davis a visit at his home in Woodham Walter. It was a rural part of Essex with only 4 houses. These houses were not numbered traditionally, but rather each had a name. He knocked on the first door and an elderly couple answered. When they asked Redmond who he was looking for, he gave them the name David Davis. The couple then informed him their neighbor was not Davis, but Ron Platt. They went on to describe Platt to Redmond, and he realized that they were talking about the same man he had met with previously. Redmond knew something was wrong here. He contacted Clenahan back in Devon and explained how, by sheer chance, he just unmasked another chapter to the story. Detectives from both counties now knew there was more to the story than met the eye. Redmond started focusing on gathering information about the man who was posing as his dead friend. He revisited the elderly couple he came to know as Frank and Aubrey. They told him the tale of Ron Platt and his rather young wife and 2 little children. They also mentioned that Platt and his family had often vacationed in Devon as they had a yacht down there. The name, though, escaped them. In Devon, Clenahan too started re-examining the evidence and began by questioning old witnesses. His first stop was John Coppic. When questioned, Coppic told him that the neck dragged up a 10-pound anchor along with Platt's body. Coppic gave the anchor to a friend, who then gave it to his mother to sell. Fortunately, the anchor remained unsold, and investigators were able to retrieve and bag the anchor as evidence. For Clenahan, the next stop was interviewing those who knew Platt. He contacted Platt's brother Brian, who told them about Elaine Boyes. Boyes was Platt's ex-partner. They'd been together for 13 years. Investigators paid Boyes a visit and discovered the connection between Platt and Davis. Boyes met Davis in 1991 while working as a receptionist at the Fine Arts Auctioneer in Harrogate, England. She remembered Davis being tall, engaging, and charming. They spoke about Davis moving to Yorkshire, and the topic veered toward employment. Davis wanted Boyes to work for his company. She explained that it wouldn't be for long, as she and Platt were planning on relocating to Canada. Charming his way in, Davis told Boyes that he could help her and Platt save up to make the move to Canada. It was not long before Boyes began working as an executive assistant for Davis. She then introduced Platt to Davis, and the two men developed a fast friendship. The couple were mesmerized by Davis's grandiose stories and admired his lavish lifestyle. Davis made them an offer to be directors of his company, the Cavendish Corporation. Initially, Boyes was hesitant about the offer. Davis explained his reasons for not wanting to have his name linked to the business. He alleged that his ex-wife was a wealthy doctor living in New York who still demanded he pay alimony. By now, the couple developed a trusting relationship with Davis and believed their friend was truly trying to keep his wife at bay. Davis had both Boyes and Platt traveling to Europe to broker deals for him and slowly pulled them into the web he was weaving. They deposited money for him into various foreign bank accounts, never questioning David or his motives. He was trustworthy, a man of religion, and in their eyes, infallible. On Christmas Day, 1992, Davis invited the couple to spend the day with them and his daughter, Noelle. After enjoying the hearty meal, they sat down to exchange gifts. Boyes' car was the ultimate gift. Davis had made a promise to buy the couple 2 tickets to Canada if they were willing to use them before February 1993. For Boyes, it seemed a bit overwhelming with a short notice, but Platt was on cloud 9. His lifelong dream of returning to Canada was being realized thanks to this generous man he had come to call a true friend. Davis convinced them that it was better they get a start on their new life sooner than later. Davis wasted no time in preparing for their imminent departure. He suggested to both Boyes and Platt to have rubber stamps of their signatures made in case he needed to sign any documents urgently. He'd also keep their driver's licenses with him in case proof of identity was required. This didn't seem a tall order for the couple because they trusted Davis, saying he'd just given them the start they needed. And so, in February of 1993, Boyes and Platt jetted off to Canada to begin their new lives. Canada did not offer the greener grass that the couple had expected. They'd landed in the country in the middle of winter. Work was scarce, and financial troubles soon turned into relationship problems. Boyes and Platt tried to make it work, but the growing tension created a rift, and they soon drifted apart. 5 months later, Boyes returned to England to attend her sister's wedding as a bridesmaid. She had no intention of returning to Canada. Having become family friends, Davis was also invited to the wedding. There, he spoke to Boyes and inquired after Platt. He was upset after hearing that Boyes was not returning to Canada and that she and Platt had ended their relationship. Davis tried convincing Boyes to give Platt in Canada a second chance. When she refused, Davis suddenly changed tactics. He soon packed up his life and family and left Boyes with a mobile number. Their friendship dissolved, and soon the calls disappeared as well. Platt and Boyes, too, were no longer in contact. Since leaving Canada, she'd not had any contact with her ex-lover Platt or her once dear friend Davis. So when Davis contacted Boyes late in 1996, she didn't think much of the impromptu conversation, as they barely had anything to say to each other after all that time. He mentioned nothing about Platt, and that was that. He failed to inform her that Platt was dead. After the interview was over, Boyes told police she now had her suspicions that Davis was somehow involved in Platt's death. Boyes provided the vital link between Davis and Platt, but investigators needed more definitive clues. They began talking to witnesses. After the wedding in Harrogate, Davis made a quick escape with his family to Devon. There, he began introducing himself as Ron Platt. His daughter was pregnant, and so he introduced people to her as his wife, sometimes calling her Elaine Boyes, other times Noelle Platt. It was also common knowledge that Davis owned a yacht. Adding further suspicion was that witnesses said they had seen Platt and Davis together a month before Platt's body was discovered. They'd allegedly booked into the Steam Packet Inn as brothers David and Ronald Platt. By now, police knew Davis was lying about Platt and his knowledge about his death. They needed a final bit of evidence, though. Looking into mobile records, Davis's numbers showed that calls had been made from the same area that the medical examiner estimated the drowning of Platt occurred. Essex police planned a sting operation to arrest Davis on suspicion of Platt's murder. They waited for him to arrive at the Chelmsford train station after being tipped off by Boyes, who agreed to meet Davis for coffee. He, however, evaded them. Redmond, though, was tenacious and decided to drive by the family home. There he noticed activity, but he did not pounce immediately, calling for backup instead. There was the assumption that Davis might be armed. As they prepared to make their move, a taxi pulled up to the driveway and Davis made a quick getaway as the taxi sped off. Police gave chase and Davis was eventually apprehended. With a gun trained on him, Davis surrendered without incident. Little did police know this was only the tip of the iceberg. Davis was arrested and his fingerprints taken. Running them through an international database revealed another twist to an already thickening plot. The prints came back belonging to a man named Albert Johnson Walker. He was ranked number 4 on Interpol's wanted list and was Canada's most wanted fugitive. Walker's story begins in Canada 6 years before Platt's body was discovered in the Atlantic Ocean. Born in Hamilton, Ontario on August 9, 1945, Walker always dreamed big. He was a high school dropout with a larger-than-life presence. He worked as a bank teller and spent much of his free time socializing in Ontario. It was during a social event he met his ex-wife, Barbara MacDonald. After a whirlwind romance spanning all of 4 days, he proposed to her and they married in 1968. They started a family early, having 3 girls and 4 boys. They raised the family in Paris, Ontario. After years of helping other people with financial solutions, Walker started a freelance bookkeeping business with Barbara. Business thrived, and within 10 years he was operating 6 branches, employing over 30 people. Friends eagerly invested with him. All the while, he was siphoning their money into offshore accounts in both the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Soon, the cracks started to appear. His marriage broke down following his numerous affairs. The people he was stealing from started asking questions, and in 1990, Walker decided it was time to leave before it all blew up. Telling friends he was taking their then 15-year-old daughter, Sheena, for a skiing trip to Europe, he made his escape. Barbara realized what was going on and, fearing for her daughter's safety, declared her a missing person. Police were on his trail, but it abruptly ended in London. He adopted a new identity stolen from a client. He was now going by David Wallace Davis, and Sheena became Noel. Although he evaded authorities, the name David Davis still linked him back to his true identity. He needed to find a new identity, and the opportunity presented himself when he met Ronald Platt. Platt kept a very small circle of friends and was obsessed with living in Canada. Walker used this knowledge to his advantage. The wheels were in motion, and Walker finally had the identity he needed. But plans fell through when Platt contacted Walker in 1995. Life in Canada was not the dream he foresaw. He informed Walker that he was moving back to Essex to settle near Davis. The solid foundation Walker was curating started to, again, crack at the edges. Having 2 Ronald Platts in the same area with the same birth details was not going to work well for Walker. So he hatched a plan. Walker had purchased a yacht and named her Lady Jane. He had taken his family and Platt down to Tutney's in Devon to celebrate the launch of the vessel. While there, the men purchased a new 10-pound anchor, which, ironically, became vital evidence in the investigation. After returning to Essex, Walker invited Platt for another weekend down in Devon, just 2 friends enjoying the coast and some fishing. Walker sailed the Lady Jane out into open water, a safe distance from any onlookers on shore. He then hit Platt over the head with the anchor, knocking him unconscious. Walker rummaged through his pockets to remove any identification before securing the anchor to his belt and tossing him over to a water grave. It was the perfect murder. Except, Walker made one crucial mistake. He forgot to remove the Rolex that unraveled a finely executed plot to escape justice. Walker's trial began in 1998. Evidence presented to the court included the anchor that was discovered in the naft with Platt's body. Forensic experts were able to determine that the injury on Platt's head was consistent with the shape of the anchor. There were also traces of zinc found on the belt of the pants that were consistent with zinc on the anchor. Walker weighed Platt down by securing it to his belt. A search of Lady Jane yielded more physical evidence. Hairs matching Platt were found on a cushion beyond. Platt's fingerprint was found on the carrier bag used to carry the anchor back to Lady Jane. Blood was found near the rails. At his home, Walker's habit of courting did him in, as documents were confiscated and used to prove his bogus business enterprises and trail of deception. It was, however, the testimonies of both Boyes and Sheena that were to be the final nails in his coffin. Boyes' testimony provided the court with evidence that Walker had much to lose if Ron Platt returned to England. Sheena, however, delivered the final blow. She was unable to provide a solid alibi for Walker on the weekend of the murder. She also confirmed he had been out on the yacht and looked disheveled and agitated when he returned late on the day of the murder. Sheena's testimony opened an entirely new chapter of the saga. She told the court of her life living in fear with her father, his ability to charm, and how she felt as much of a victim as anyone else who crossed his path. When Walker took the stand, he presented a very charming persona to the court. He said that Sheena begged him to take her along. He admitted to fraud and to other crimes, but denied killing Platt. The blood found on the yacht was due to Platt bumping his head while they were out fishing, he said. Yet the jury saw through the lies and took just 2 hours to find him guilty. High Court Justice Neil Butterfield addressed Walker, stating, "The killing was carefully planned and cunningly executed with chilling efficiency. You are a plausible, intelligent, and ruthless man who poses a serious threat to anyone who stands in your way." He was sentenced to 15 years to life. In 2005, he was allowed to return to Canada to serve out his sentence. In 2007, aged 61, he was given an additional 4 years to run concurrently with his sentence. In 2015, he filed an application for parole, but withdrew it at the last moment. Now, at age 75, the Parole Board of Canada has denied him his freedom by revoking his application for day and full parole. He was also denied his request to go to Vancouver Island unaccompanied or a personal development program. It's likely he will never taste freedom again. Walker did, indeed, execute an almost perfect crime. However, karma has a way of catching up. Had it not been for Rollo Platt's genuine Rolex and a string of events that occurred by sheer chance, he may have gotten away with it. Every relationship of a person is based on the pillar of trust, whether it's between parents and children, husband and wife, or even between boyfriend and girlfriend. But if someone breaks the trust of another person in these essential relationships and starts thinking badly about them, it feels really terrible. And today's case is somewhat similar, where a boy and a girl from Pakistan were very happy in their relationship. But then, after some time, the girl breaks up because she started seeing a dark side of her boyfriend. But then, what the boy did with his girlfriend shook the entire Pakistan. Shaukat Ali Muqaddam was not only a normal citizen of Pakistan, but also a diplomat and ambassador of Pakistan. Due to this, he had to live in different countries. However, in 2021, he was living in Islamabad, Pakistan. Apart from this, at one point, Shaukat Ali had also been Pakistan's ambassador to South Korea and Kazakhstan. Because of this, he held a very high position in Pakistan. There were a total of 5 people in his family, including Shaukat Muqaddam, his wife Kausar Muqaddam, 2 daughters and 1 son. October 23, 1993, was the day when a beautiful girl was born in Shaukat Ali's house, whom they named Noor. Noor was a healthy and cute baby who always laughed and never bothered anyone too much. Although Shaukat's professional life was very busy and stressful, but when he came home, he spent quality time with his family. As a result, his children had a very good upbringing. From school days, Noor had a great interest in studying. She always used to read either school books or other books. Now, because Shaukat Muqaddam was a diplomat, he used to get transferred to other countries due to his work, which is why Noor started her schooling from Ireland. Then she completed high school from South Korea. After South Korea, the family moved to Kazakhstan, but Noor thinks about completing her college in the US, where her older sister Sarah also lived. However, After the US, Noor returned to Pakistan, Islamabad. As humble and smart as Noor was in her childhood, she was equally humble and smart in her adult years. That's why everyone at home trusted Noor and easily accepted her decisions. Besides, Noor loved animals, especially stray dogs and cats. She used to feed them whenever she had time. Although Noor belonged to a wealthy family, she never had a liking for materialistic things. By hearing all these things, you must have understood that Noor was a kind-hearted, down-to-earth, intelligent and confident girl. Along with all these things, Noor also had a great passion for art and calligraphy. She often made religious paintings too. As I mentioned, coming from a wealthy diplomat family, parties were a common occurrence at the diplomats' homes. So Shaukat Muqaddam often took his family to such parties because they were excellent for networking and building connections. It was at one such party in 2018 that Noor met a boy named Zahir Jaffer. Zahir and Noor are both going to be key characters in this case. So before we proceed, let's take a brief look at Zahir's background. Zahir Jaffer was born in the USA, but he spent his childhood and teenage years in Pakistan. After that, Zahir pursued his graduation in the US and also spent some time living in the UK. Zahir's father was Zakir Jaffer, who was a very successful businessman. Due to his father's business ventures, the Jaffer family was one of the wealthiest families in Pakistan. The Jaffer family had various businesses, including healthcare, oil, real estate, and construction. This also provided them with opportunities to work with their country's military. One of these companies is Ahmed Jaffer and Company, where Zahir Jaffer is now the CEO, while his father, Zakir Jaffer, used to oversee the company. But after some time, Zahir's mood changed, and he started working as a therapist at a company called Therapy Works. In this company, Zahir used to listen to the children of the school and explain to them about mental health care. He also used to arrange lectures and presentations for the children. But the shocking thing here is that Zahir himself was an introverted and angry since childhood. He also had very few friends, and he rarely attended parties with them. But it is at one such party that he meets Noor, and he likes her, and Noor also enjoys talking to Zahir. Perhaps this happened because their personalities were different, and people say that opposite personalities are attracted to each other. However, both their families already knew each other because they used to attend such parties, but friendship between Noor and Zahir developed from this party. Then, after some time, this friendship turned into love, and they both entered into a romantic relationship. However, it's not like they kept this fact hidden from their parents or friends. Rather, both their families and friends knew that Zahir and Noor were dating. Both families were happy because Noor completes Zahir and Zahir completes Noor. Actually, Noor brought out a side of Zahir that no one had seen before, whereas Zahir used to be very introverted before. But as soon as he met Noor, his personality began to change gradually. He started enjoying his life, hanging out with people, and at one party, people were surprised to see Zahir dancing with Noor, including Zahir's family, because they had never thought they would see this side of Zahir's personality. Everything was going well, but as the relationship grew older, things started to deteriorate. Initially, everything was going well in the relationship. Both were enjoying themselves, and their families were also very happy. But then, after some time, a different side of Zahir came out in front of Noor. Actually, Noor later finds out that Zahir is a very aggressive and abusive man. Allegedly, Zahir had physically and mentally abused Noor several times. Not only that, Zahir had also raised his hand against his own mother before. As a result, after almost 3 years of relationship, when Noor couldn't bear Zahir anymore, she broke up with him at the beginning of 2021. In both families, there was dissatisfaction over their children ending the relationship. Because neither of them was a normal family, and in such affluent households, it's not typical for a boy and a girl to enter a relationship, break up shortly after, and then enter into a relationship with someone else later. In fact, people like them also see relationships as a business. Like most wealthy families, they marry off their sons or daughters where they can profit. But besides that, Zahir was also displeased that Noor left him, and now he took it as an affront to his male ego. However, after some time, Zahir also started thinking about moving on, and then he thought he would go back to the US and settle there because he also had US citizenship along with Pakistani citizenship. Now let's jump to July 18th, 2021. On this day, Zahir booked a taxi to go to Islamabad International Airport. Actually, according to Pakistan Standard Time, Zahir's flight to New York was at 3:50 a.m. on July 19th. He had already packed his bags and informed his family about it. But before leaving, he wanted to meet Noor just once, so he called Noor on the evening of July 18th. At that time, Noor was at her home, preparing for Eid with her family. Now, Zahir called Noor and requested, "I am leaving this country for New York, and I will never come back here again, but I will settle in the US, so please meet me once before I leave." Additionally, Zahir told Noor, "Come to my house, we'll meet, and then when I leave for the airport from my house, I'll drop you off at your home first." Although these two had already broken up, before that they had been in a relationship for 3 years, which led Noor to say yes to meeting Zahir. After that, at 9:05 p.m., Noor leaves her house. But she doesn't tell her family that she's going to Zahir's house. She just says she's going to her friend's house and will be back soon. Around 10 p.m., Noor arrives outside Zahir's house at the scent location in Sector F74. But strange things start happening from here. Now, as I told you, Zahir's flight was at 3:50 a.m., but between 10 and 11 p.m., Zahir calls his travel agency multiple times. Zahir called his travel agency and started asking them very strange questions like, "What would happen if I don't board this flight? Will I get my refund back? If I decide to book tickets again after 10 days, what will happen?" Sometime later, Zahir called his travel agency again and said that now I'm not canceling my ticket, but I've decided to go to the US on this flight. But let me tell you, during this time, Noor was inside his house with him. But for her, this house was a new place because she had never been here before. Afterward, the taxi that Zahir had booked to go to the airport also arrives outside Jathar's house at exactly 11 p.m. However, Zahir doesn't come out of the house for half an hour. Meanwhile, the taxi driver called Zahir 2 or 3 times, but Zahir told him to wait, saying, "I'll be there in just 5 minutes." However, at 12:07 a.m., he calls the taxi driver again and says, "My plan to go to the airport is canceled now. Anyway, if we leave for the airport now, I won't be able to catch my flight." Despite waiting for more than an hour, Zahir pays the taxi driver half the fare. Actually, Zahir had booked this taxi for 2,000 Pakistani rupees. Now, after that, the taxi driver leaves from there. But at 1:40 a.m., Zahir calls the taxi driver again and asks him to come back to his house. Now, the taxi driver also returns to Zahir's house because he knew he would get the full payment. But this time too, Zahir made the taxi driver wait outside the house for a few minutes, and then at 2:15 a.m., Zahir comes out with his luggage. But the strange thing this time was that Noor was also with him, and she didn't have sandals on her feet, which the driver found very strange. However, what struck him as even strange was that Zahir was talking to Noor during the car ride, but Noor wasn't responding to his words. Although the driver didn't pay much attention to this at the time, halfway through, Zahir told the driver, "Now take the car back towards home anyway. We're already very late. I don't think we'll make it to the airport on time and catch the flight." After that, the taxi driver drops them off again at Jaffar's house at 2:35 a.m. But as soon as Noor got out of the taxi, Zahir pulled her inside the house. According to the taxi driver's statement, he felt like Noor wasn't supposed to go back inside the house with Zahir, but Zahir forcefully took her inside. Then, on July 19th, Noor stayed at Zahir's house the whole day, and then July 20th arrived, which was the day of Eid. Noor had come to Zahir's house to meet him on July 18th at 9:05 p.m., but now it had been more than 24 hours, and Noor's father and mother had returned home after shopping for Eid. But when they find out that their daughter has been missing from home for 24 hours, at 12:57 a.m. on July 20th, Shaukat Muqaddam texts his daughter, asking her where she is. However, Noor doesn't reply to that text message. Then, at 5:48 a.m., Noor's mother messages her, and 2 family friends also call Noor, yet there is no response from Noor. This causes worry for Noor's parents, and they were about to inform the police about it. But at 10:43 a.m., Noor sends a voice recording to her mother. However, the contents of that recording were never made public, but it was the last time Noor's mother, Kausar Mukaddam, heard her daughter's voice. But after sending the voice message, another strange thing happens. Zahir immediately calls Noor's mother from his own phone and tells her that Noor is not at his house, trying to prove that he hasn't even seen Noor. Then, from 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. that same day, Zahir repeatedly calls his father, Zakir Jaffer. However, at around 7:10 p.m., Noor is seen on CCTV cameras. But by that time, her condition was very bad, and it seemed as though Zahir had tortured her severely. In the CCTV footage, Noor is seen jumping from the balcony of Zahir's house on the first floor and falling directly onto an iron grill. This caused her to sustain an injury to her abdomen, which is why she is seen holding her stomach in this clip. She was actually distressed by Zahir's harassment and wanted to leave the house. However, the security guard closed the gate, and meanwhile Zahir also jumps from the balcony to catch Noor and brings her back inside. But as he was bringing her back, Noor falls down, but Zahir drags her inside. Now, I should tell you that it wasn't just Zahir and Noor inside the house. There was also a security guard, a cook, and a gardener. But none of them helped Noor. In fact, from July 18th to July 20th, Noor attempted to escape from this house 6 times. But each time, one of Zahir's servants informed him, and Noor was always caught. But this time, because of Noor's attempt to escape, Zahir becomes very angry. After bringing Noor back inside, he calls his father once again around 7:30 p.m. But since then, Zahir didn't call anyone for 30 minutes, because in the meantime, Zahir first attempts to shoot Noor with his handgun, but as soon as he presses the trigger, his gun jams. However, even after that, Zahir doesn't stop wanting to kill Noor. It was already in his mind. So he takes out a Swiss knife and starts stabbing every part of Noor's body. Meanwhile, Noor scratches Zahir's face and arms with her nails, but after some time, Noor's condition deteriorates so much that she faints. Noor was unconscious, but even then, Zahir kept stabbing her with the knife. Afterward, he grabs Noor by the throat and keeps squeezing until Noor's last breath is gone. Later, Noor's post-mortem report reveals that she died due to lack of oxygen, but before killing Noor, Zahir ripped her several times. But Zahir didn't stop there. After Noor's death, he pulled out his knife and started cutting Noor's throat, and finally, he severed her head from her body. After killing Noor, Zahir quickly calls his father and friends, saying, "Thieves have broken into our house, and I need help." At the same time, some of Zahir's friends head towards his house. However, Zahir's father wasn't there. That's why he called the CEO of the company where Zahir worked, named Therapy Works, and said, "Quickly go to my house and save my son at any cost." In reality, Zahir's father, Zakir Jaffer, called the CEO of that company because they needed to erase all evidence of Noor's murder by going to Zahir. Moreover, the CEO of the company had to comply because Zahir's father was funding the company. Around 8:30 p.m., Tahir Zahur, the CEO of Therapy Works, arrives outside Zahir's house with his 6 employees. Additionally, some of Zahir's friends were also present. However, the door of Zahir's house remained closed, so Tahir took a ladder and, with his employees, entered through the window on the first floor. But as soon as they reached the first floor, Zahir attacked one of the employees with a knife, piercing through his chin and tongue. Zahir was extremely angry at that moment, so 5 to 6 people quickly grabbed him to control him. After this, Zahir's hands were tied behind his back, and ropes were also tied around his feet. But as soon as the people went inside Zahir's room from the balcony, they were stunned. In fact, there was blood everywhere on the floor, even on the walls of the room. Then they saw Noor's body in the center of the room, but her head was 3 feet away from her body. Now, Everyone inside the room was astonished to regain control over Zahir, and after seeing Noor's dead body. But in the meantime, the neighbors were also quite alert, because when Zahir was being caught, he was screaming a lot, which made his neighbors call the police. After that, the police arrived there, and then on July 20th, around 10 o'clock at night, the police called Shaukat Muqaddam to inform him that his daughter had been murdered. Hearing this sad news, Muqaddam's family home was engulfed in mourning because their youngest and dearest daughter was no longer in this world. But Noor's family knew who had done all this, and now they wanted to punish Zahir according to Pakistan law, meaning the death penalty. After that, the police arrested Zahir, but now they were worried about how Zahir would confess his crime. But Zahir did something very strange here too. As soon as the police caught Zahir, he confessed in a short while that he was the one who had killed Noor, and he had done so because he loved Noor very much. He had even proposed marriage to Noor, but she had rejected his marriage proposal and later broke up with him. This hurt Zahir's ego, so he booked his and Noor's one-way tickets to New York for July 19th. But before this, Zahir had decided that if Noor agreed to go to New York with him, they would get married and settle in New York. But if Noor didn't agree, he would kill her. However, from July 18th to 20th, Zahir tried to convince Noor for marriage, but when Noor refused to marry him, Zahir finally assaulted her very brutally. Although all the servants in Zahir's house knew what Zahir did with Noor, none of them tried to stop him even once, not even daring to call the police, because they were afraid that if they did, Zahir would not spare them. Now, even though Zahir had confessed his crime in front of the police, when the case went to court, he was behaving strangely in court. Firstly, he entered the court looking disheveled as if he hadn't bathed for days. Besides, he shouted loudly in the courtroom, even abusing the judge. Furthermore, the police had to drag him into the court and out of the court forcefully. However, he was doing all these things to prove that he is mentally unstable, and because of this, he should be spared from the death penalty for the murder of Noor. If it were proven that Zahir is mentally unstable, then firstly, his punishment would be reduced, and secondly, he would escape the death penalty. Actually, Zahir had schizophrenia, and he wanted to take advantage of it by telling the court that he is mentally unfit. Actually, schizophrenia is a serious mental illness in which a person is mostly lost in the world of imagination and knows very little about the real world. Because of this, he often behaves strangely. But when Zahir's medical examination was done, the report clearly stated that Zahir is mentally fit, and whatever he did with Noor, he did it consciously. But this made it clear that Zahir was an abuser and an aggressive person. Besides, there were many harassment cases against Zahir in both the US and Pakistan. In this case, during the ongoing trial in court, the entire Pakistan raised its voice for justice for Noor. Rallies and marches were held every day. As a result, on February 24, 2022, Noor received justice, and Zahir was sentenced to 2 death penalties, one for physically assaulting Noor and the other for her murder. Additionally, his 2 house staff, Iftikhar and Mohammed Jan, were also sentenced to 10 years in jail. Looking at the photos, you wouldn't know much, but Zahir was a powerful, tall, and aggressive man with whom a sweet and innocent girl, Noor, spent almost 48 hours. And those 48 hours were nothing less than hell for her. So with this, the Noor Muqaddam murder case comes to an end right here. If you appreciate our efforts, like and share this video. If you haven't subscribed, do so now. Thank you.